Welcome to 6 African Trade Talks, the show that brings you closer to the intra-Africa trade business world. I'm your host, Chad Chawanda. In this episode, our guest is Nicolas Vonthron. Nick is Chief Executive Officer at Mama Money. Mama Money is the world's first social business money transfer operator. Nick, welcome to 6 African Trade Talks. How are you?
I'm great, thanks, Chad.
Great, pleasure to have you here. Before we start our show, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
Nick, please tell us more about yourself and your journey, how you got to Mama Money.
Sure, and thanks a lot for inviting me and inviting us to this podcast. I'm really excited to be chatting with you today. So a little bit about me, right? As you can hear, I'm French, and I've started working for a French startup in the telecom industry like a few years ago. And back in these days, I've launched an international prepaid card for migrant workers in France. So I started actually my career already looking at migration issues or challenges. And then I went traveling after that, and I realized that actually I really wanted to be involved in emerging economies and to have an impact, on the world and to have social impact. And I think it's been driving me throughout my career. I worked for Orange, for Africa and Middle East, and I got exposed to Orange Money, which I'm sure you know about. And that's when I realized that there's a massive impact and a massive potential for mobile money to include people in the financial economy and in the formal economy. And I got really excited by that. I moved from the telecom industry to the payments industry. And I got really interested and passionate about interoperability and cross-border payments and movement of currencies, especially in emerging economies. And I think that's really when I became a payment geek. That was in 2014. And I got also tired of the corporate world and all its norms, the fact that it's slow and sometimes it's a bit political. So I joined a cross-border payments startup in 2016 to look after their business for Africa and then Europe. That company is called Tunes. And that's actually when I met the two Mama Money founders, Matt and Raf. Back then, I was their account manager, and they were my customer. And I was helping them grow by opening up what we call corridors, which is essentially markets. I helped them open Zimbabwe, for instance, to help their customers send to Zimbabwe, and then Malawi, and then Ghana, etc. And I really got excited by their journey. They're very inspirational. What they're trying to achieve, I think, is amazing. And myself, I think I was on a personal quest for more meaningful impact in the world, and I got tired of corporate jobs, so it was a great opportunity. We decided that it was actually an amazing idea for me to join them. I'm super pleased about that because I'm joining a few dots, working on social impact, number one, and also on cross-border payments, number two.
Interesting. Thank you very much for sharing. What an amazing journey. You joined Mama Money in 2018, and you're now the CEO. What is Mama Money? And can you share with us some significant milestones?
Sure. So I joined in 2018. I first joined as COO, and during the first COVID lockdowns, it actually slowly would make sense for me to slowly become the CEO. We've made that in a few steps, and the idea behind it is that we're a very ambitious company. We want to drive impact at scale, so our organization needs to be more professional and efficient. So what is Mama Money and who we are? We are what we call a social impact FinTech, which means that we are having a broader positive impact on society. And that impact for us is even more important than maximizing profits. So we are a social business, meaning that we have a profitability responsibility for sustainability purposes, but also we are actually trying to drive social impact. So the company started in 2015. The mission back then was to reduce the cost of money transfers. That was why the company was started. That was its purpose. And today we feel that we've achieved a lot of this in South Africa. And we want to, reduce the cost of transacting cross-border even more. But there's, I think, more to be said there. If you look at South Africa back in 2015, it was actually one of the most expensive countries to transact from, especially as a migrant worker. And we're talking about a population which is usually underserved and which is not very wealthy. So the fact that they pay high fees has a massive impact on their lives. And when they're sending money for essential needs. They send money to sustain their families, they send money for school fees, they send money for food. So it's super important. And we feel we have a responsibility in driving that cost down, which is really why the company started. So today we offer 3 types of services in South Africa. We offer cross-border payments out of South Africa in multiple regions of the world. We service up to 50 countries, mainly in Africa, but also in South Asia. We also offer cross-border payments in South Africa coming from abroad. So we also facilitate that. And for these 2 products, we are licensed by the South African Reserve Bank, by the regulator here in South Africa. And then last but not least, we also offer a banking product for our customers, which is specifically designed for migrant workers, because you may know for them, it's quite hard to access banking because of identity challenges. And so we've made that a possibility with our own service. I think you can see here that from the first days of Mama Money, where driving costs down were the big objective, we actually expanded into more than that because we have bigger problems to solve. We believe that cost is a problem, but we have bigger problems to solve. Our vision has evolved. And actually, we're ambitious and we want to do more than only cross-border payments and driving the cost down. Let me maybe talk about milestones, that are an illustration of that. I was referring to the cost of money transfer in South Africa in 2015. And actually in 2015, it was on average of 14%, according to the World Bank, meaning that anybody that would send money from South Africa would pay 14%. It's a very, very high fee. The United Nations, have the Sustainable Development Goals as an objective by 2050. They're trying to get the fees for cross-border transfers to be reduced a 5% mark. 2015, it was 14%, so super high. Today, we're super pleased because it's actually 7% average. So we are much closer to the worldwide average, which is actually 6%. So from 2015 to today, we moved from 14% to 7%. And that's like the massive achievement. If I put that into numbers, the South Africa money transfer out of the country last year was about $4 billion, which is 7 billion rand. So a very lot of money flowing out of the country for very essential needs. And a 7% average fee compared to the 14% back in 2015, we're talking about 5 billion rand savings going to the pockets of people who really need it. So we're very, very pleased about these achievements. We believe that we've been at the forefront of that price reduction in South Africa. And more work is to be done, but obviously we're super pleased about that.
Wow, that's an amazing milestone and very impactful. That leads us to the social impact. What social impact does a fintech like Mama Money have?
I mean, that's a great question, right? It's something that we have very, very close to our hearts. I think if we talk about the challenge that we're trying to overcome, migrations are seen today as a big problem and they're seen as a big challenge for the entire world, Obviously, you have a lot of migration that are due to political unrest, economical instability, but there's also climate change, which is actually accelerating migrations and accelerating forced migration. So that trend is a growing trend. And whether you like it or not, it's a reality where people who are in certain countries that are under instability or that are getting very hot are gonna move. And the UN is estimating the number of migrants to grow and by 2050 to increase by at least 150 million across the world, which is a very, very large amount of people who are gonna move from their home countries. About half of these are gonna come from Africa. So we feel we have a key responsibility towards migrants because we believe they are key contributors to the economy in all the countries where they move to. And they play a crucial role in a lot of essential services. And we've seen that during COVID, right? A lot of the essential services, nurses or, in hospitality are actually managed by migrants across the world. And yet, usually they are underserved. We believe that's the key social impact that we can have as a fintech, supporting migrations and making sure they happen on a respectable way. And we see that impact at different levels. Obviously, our customers are migrants, so we help them save money because we reduce the costs of sending money home. So we help them save money. We also help them getting financially included in the formal economy through our bank accounts, which has a lot of positive impact downstream, for them to save money on their account, digital money, and then for them to transact digitally, which also help them get more resilience when they are facing shocks. So that's a key impact. We obviously have a second impact on the recipient side, because everybody who received remittances use these remittances for fundamental services. If we look at Zimbabwe today, over 10% of the Zimbabwean economy depends on remittances, and it's actually impacting millions of people on a yearly basis. And then last, we also employ migrant workers in South Africa. We have a larger agent network, which is helping us to educate customers and to register customers. We're talking about 2,000 people here, and all of them are migrants. So it's not easy for them necessarily because, there's xenophobia in South Africa, and it's not an easy place for foreigners. Usually, they also come from a very tough environment to support their families. So they leave their home country, they come to South Africa, they hope of a better future, and they make it with us. They start working with us. And so really they make it, but they're still facing a lot of discrimination in South Africa. And I would say this is a common trend across the world. And so we offer them a way to earn extra income. So yeah, I think these are the three layers of the social impact that we're having.
Thank you for sharing. That's quite impactful. I mean, I'm from Zimbabwe myself, and I've seen people trying to do all sorts of ways to send money and trying to run away from the cost. So the fact that you reduce the cost with such a huge amount is quite impactful. And when I visit places like Zimbabwe, I can see that what an extra dollar can do for people. So that's very, very impactful. Based on your travels and market knowledge, what impact do remittances have on the African continent overall?
I mean, they have a massive impact on the African continent. And actually, we need to take a step back and look at it beyond remittances. Remittances today and the cross-border remittances are used to actually move money and move currencies around. So there's a big macroeconomic impact on the receiving countries, especially countries that are very dependent on remittances on their GDP. If we talk about Somalia, for instance, or Lesotho, 25% of the Somalian GDP is coming from remittances. 20% of the Lesotho GDP is coming from remittances. We just talked about Zimbabwe, right, which at least is 10%. I mean, Senegal is 10%, Ghana is 6%. So here we're talking usually a lot about what we call the north to south remittances. A lot of these money is coming from the US. A lot of this money is coming from the UK or the European continent. A lot also from South Africa. So these have a massive impact in terms of macroeconomical sustainability for the countries and in terms of the stability of their currency. And we've seen as well with the crisis and the current crisis we're in, that actually remittances are a key contributor to also economical stability and the currency in certain markets. So a very, very big contribution on the economical side. But that's not it, right? There's also a very micro impact at individual level, which we're very passionate about. And you talked about it, like an extra dollar makes a big difference in Zimbabwe. That's why we try to reduce that cost. And these remittances have an impact on the recipient lives. A lot of people do receive remittances to live. It's not only an extra money that they're getting, it's actually they're relying on it for essential services or sometimes for food. So it's a very, very important flow. And a lot of these countries are dependent on it, or the people living in these countries are dependent on that. There's another layer to it, I think, when we look at intra-Africa trade. Not all the countries have the same reality. They don't have the same infrastructure, but there's still a lot of informal trade between the borders. If you go at the border of South Africa and Mozambique, you have a lot of movements there. It's buzzing, And it's the same, for instance, if you look at the countries surrounding Nigeria, there's a lot of trade that are happening at the borders. Usually it's very informal. Everything is happening in cash. People sell goods and services and they pay in cash. And efficient cross-border payments, usually in the form of small remittances, do support that trade and that economic activity. So it's another impact, I think, that it has on the continent. And it's very specific to the African continent, where the trade is more and more using some of the remittance channel to make it quicker and safer. The last maybe impact it can have, and it's something that also is very important for us at Mama Money, it's a gender gap impact. If we talk about Zimbabwe again, we see that 50% of our customers using the service for Zimbabwe are actually women. It's something that we are very proud of because there's a big challenge in uplifting women in their communities in many countries, and we feel that remittances and giving access to a wide payment mechanism, is helping also women to uplift.
And that obviously aligns with some of the sustainable development goals, when it comes to gender equality. So thank you very much for sharing. Before we continue, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus, experience the best of Africa.
So Nick, looking forward, what is next for Mama Money? Are there any plans for further expansion?
Yeah, there are. We have a lot of plans. So we're very excited about our future. We talked about that big first milestone, being a key contributor to reducing costs for sending money out of South Africa. But we want to carry on that. We feel 7% average is not yet a full success. I think it's a good milestone. And so we want to carry on reducing the cost for migrant workers to send money out of South Africa. And we're going to do that through digitizing and formalizing remittances. A lot of remittances in South Africa are still being facilitated by the informal market, whether it's a bus driver or sometimes very, very structured companies that are operating illegally in South Africa and that charge very high fees. However, they are trusted in their communities. But we feel, as Mama Money, we have a responsibility to formalize these remittances and to digitize them through our channels and through our service. So we use a mobile app where it's very easy to send money from that app. So that's the biggest plan that we have, to carry on that journey. We're looking also at money in and out of South Africa. So we're tackling both flows, not only the money going out, but also the money going in. And especially within Africa. So South Africa to Africa and Africa to South Africa. This is a big focus for us. And we feel we have a lot of work to be done to facilitate these cross-border payments. We want also to help our customers, especially the most vulnerable ones, to be more included in the financial system. So in other words, to rely less on cash. There's a lot of literature on the topic, but essentially, as you get access to digital accounts, you start being more resilient and you start being more included in the overall economy, which has a very positive impact down the line for you and for your family and your relatives. So that's also something that we're very excited about. And this is why we launched a bank account or bank service for our customers. There's a big opportunity for that product, and we're really excited about it. And then last, in the coming few years, we're also looking at international expansion. We are looking right now at new territories we could expand into. We're particularly excited by the opportunity on the continent, expanding into more territories where we could provide our service on different countries in the continent.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing. A lot of money has been invested in FinTech space in Africa. What would you say to FinTech companies who are looking for investments to accelerate growth?
I think that's a really interesting question. Especially, the last 2 years have been quite crazy on valuations and funding and press releases from fintechs. We have fintechs that came out of the blue, and in like 2-3 years, they're already unicorns and they raised like hundreds of millions of dollars. And I found that fascinating, and for us, we looked at it and we were trying to stay away a bit from these shiny stars. Although, it is appealing, right? Because when you have a good business model, which I think we have, when you have impact, which is super important also on the continent, which obviously we have, and then where you have growth, you're ticking a lot of the boxes to be able to look at investment. But we've been deliberate in not doing it. Although it's appealing, I think it can also be derailing. The main thing that it can derail is it's why the company exists, because when you get VC funding on your capital, sometimes growth becomes more important than the impact that you have, or growth become more important than the reason of why you're operating. So you start derailing from the reason you exist. Even if there's a strong rationale for getting funding, it shouldn't be an objective. It should be a mean to an end. And I strongly feel that a lot of companies have made that an objective instead of being a mean to an end. We see ourselves not as a unicorn or not wanting to become a unicorn. We see ourselves becoming a zebra, what we call a zebra, which is much more sustainable, much more teamwork related, much more collaborative. Also focusing on our core product and doing it very, very well, not pursuing too many things at the same time that would dilute our core focus. So we look at it on like smart growth. Yes, we want to grow, but we want to grow smartly. We want to understand exactly where we're growing and why we're growing. We're working a lot on our basics and our fundamentals to have very efficient operations. And I think the most important part for me is we are customer-centric. We're not investor-centric. I feel, the hype on the funding side has made a lot of companies become investor-centric and not customer-centric anymore. The current economic crisis is probably reshuffling everything, and it's obviously harder today to get funding. And whenever funding happens, it's not at the valuation that used to be, a couple of years ago. The multiples have changed and all of that. So hopefully we're going to have more reason coming into the market, especially if people are listening and have a fintech or a company or a tech company, be customer centric first, and maybe then you can look for investors. Don't do the opposite.
That's an interesting way to look at things, and it brings a memory. I remember listening to Gary Vaynerchuk in one of his podcasts, and he was talking about how companies are celebrating fundraising more than celebrating making a profit. Mama Money puts a lot of value on culture. What can you share about the importance of culture and diversity for a fintech company?
Again, a great question. It's super important for us. I think very naturally, the founders have created a space of psychological safety and like a cooler place to work. It was still the beginning, and then it became intentional. It first started very naturally with them, and then we made that an intention and part of our strategy. Essentially, we are all very connected to why we exist, and we are all connected to that with a lot of kindness at heart. We're trying to help underserved communities, and we want to do that on a very kind way. That's the first thing that I think is very important on our culture side. We also a very passionate bunch of people. We're a very value-driven team, and our culture really matters. We spend a lot of time talking about it. We spend a lot of time talking about our values, and we make sure that the people that we hire are also culture fit or even culture add. And culture becomes extremely important when we go through hard times. And most of the companies will go through hard times. They will have tough moments. They will have uncertainty. They will have a lot of change. And I think this is where culture is an anchor for that. Not to forget who we are and to keep that very close to our heart. So it is a very important focus for us. And, going back to what we were talking about investment, the tendency in fintech, especially when you have hyper growth, that can lead to more toxicity in the culture. It doesn't have to, right? But I think it can lead to more toxicity in the culture. So this is why also we have made the choice of not going that route, because culture is super important for us. And we don't want to jeopardize the people side of things. At the end of the day, we are people and we are individual, and we're trying to make a difference, and it's very important for us. So yeah, we feel that culture is a priority. It's also responsibility. It's super important for innovation, for collaboration. We want to keep an open mind on things. We want to have challenging debates and challenging conversations. So all of that is also part of our culture. But the most important thing is we're trying to solve challenges for underserved communities. And this is what is driving us. And you also mentioned diversity. We have a very diverse team, and it's something that we're also trying to build very intentionally. On the gender side, first, we want to have a good gender balance in the team. It's not always easy, especially as we are a tech company, but it's something that we're trying to do. And also, we work with migrants and diaspora, so we'd be very hypocritical of ours if we didn't have a representation of our diaspora within the team, and we have, and we're very proud of that. So overall, I think all of these components on the culture side, which is kindness at heart, driven by social impact, and also a lot of diversity, is what is attracting people to come and work with us.
Certainly, it's easy to grow in a company that has got the values that are aligned with you. So culture is definitely important. How can an international payment fintech like Mama Money impact the goals of the African Continental Free Trade Area or contribute in the realization of a successful One Africa?
Of course, I think we talked about that a little bit before when we looked at the impact of remittances across the continent, and I think it's really talking to that. So I had a look at the African Continental Free Trade Area, what is their objective, and they aim to, I'm going to quote, to deepen economic integration and attract investment, boost trade, provide better jobs, reduce poverty, and increase shared prosperity in Africa. So why do we feel that we have an impact, or how can we have an impact? I think there are certain areas where we definitely can have an impact, and we talked about them. The first one for me is reduce poverty. Remittances are extremely important, again, for recipients. Some of them rely on them for essential services, for food and for school fees, for housing, for clothing. So it's super important on that front. And there are a lot of studies also that show that remittances do have a positive impact on the recipient and can help them uplift and also get out of poverty. So I think that cross reduction in fees and cross-border transfers is really directly impacting that. And the second one for me is an indirect one, is boost trade, because a lot of informal trade is happening at the borders, as we said, and a lot of it can be digitized with remittances. And then trade happens quicker, happens safer. So this is a positive impact on the continent.
Certainly. Any podcasts or books you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
I am actually not a big podcast listener, but I would definitely recommend African Trade Talks. That would be my number one. I listen to French podcasts mainly. And then on the book side, I have a few. I read different types of books, sometimes business books, sometimes novels, and also essays. But I would recommend two, I think. I would recommend Sapiens, that book from Yuval Noah Harari, which is called A Brief History of Humankind. I think it's a brilliant book and gives a lot of perspective about who we are and how similar we are, and actually taking a massive step back on all our very irrational conflicts. And the second one would be The Art of Happiness, which is a biography and a lot of quotes from Dalai Lama.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
Africa is a continent full of potential, but potential means nothing if we don't take action to create value. Let us take action. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to post and share this episode on your social media platforms. It will help us reach our mission of sharing knowledge about intra-Africa trade and making it available to as many people as possible. Let us grow our continent. We can go far, fast, together. If you can please leave a review on our podcast page or on Apple Podcasts.